I'm Collin Corbett. I'm coming to you live from the Lincoln desk. Yes, the Lincoln desk. This piece of history was Abe Lincoln's desk down in the state legislature when he served in Illinois. It's now the centerpiece of our studio, and we're going to do these segments regularly where you can participate. Jump in the comment section, give us your thoughts. In the future, we're going to have a chance for you to call in, to take polls. We don't quite have that capability yet, but we have a topic in the news right now that we wanted to jump on that was really, really powerful. So we're jumping right into this. One of the reasons why we started this endeavor was something that Abe Lincoln talked about when he gave an address in Springfield in 1838, one of his first most famous addresses, which was addressed to the Young Man's Lyceum in Springfield. He gave that speech because at that time, just like today, many people were turning to violence. There had just been a major violent act in St. Louis. We're seeing that ourselves here today, where people are turning to violence instead of political reason to push their viewpoints. Abe Lincoln gave a speech where he cautioned that there was no country on earth that could take America. No one would take us down from the outside, but on the inside, that's where we could fall. His quote was, "If destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and finisher. As a nation of free men, we must live through all time or die by suicide." His point being is that we could destroy our society. No one else could do it for us. We're seeing that violence in the news right now, and frankly, it's driving me crazy. Just this past weekend, on Saturday, a man decided to take it on his own, drive his vehicle into an abortion clinic in Danville to try to burn it down. He loaded his car with flammable material, and according to the police report, he used his vehicle as an incendiary device. We've seen this a lot over the last few years. Both sides are turning to violence to push their political viewpoints. We saw it on January 6th, 2021, where people who had what they believed to be a grievance and a worthwhile grievance, but then some idiots from that group, many were peaceful protesters, but some from the group decided to take advantage and storm the Capitol and riot at the Capitol. A horrible thing. We've seen this on both sides. We've seen it at the Black Lives Matter protests, where some came out and peacefully protested. It was the majority of those who showed up, but then some decided to use that as an excuse to take things to a more violent end. It's not just the big stories. I've seen it in small stories too. Here in Illinois, we've seen legislators get death threats because of bills that they've run in Springfield, bills that are completely misunderstood as to what they are intended to do, and yet they're getting death threats. I remember back when Peter Roscom, a former member of Congress from the 6th Congressional District, I had heard a story about how he had to wear bulletproof vests when walking in parades because of death threats that he was receiving. It is on both sides that this is happening. It's a pox on both of our houses. But I have no influence on the other side. I'm a Republican, I'm a conservative, no progressive cares what I have to say. So while I'd love to speak to them and tell them to tone it down, I'm really just speaking to my family right now, my side of the aisle. And I have a plea. Cut it out. Stop it. You are hurting our cause way more than you're helping our cause. The unfortunate reality in this situation, talking about Danville, is the man who did this likely thought he was justified. Put yourself in his shoes, in his mindset. No matter where you stand on abortion, just for a moment, pretend you're this gentleman. This gentleman likely believes that abortion is murder, likely believes that life begins at conception. And so any abortion is murdering a baby or a young potential future life. So to him, stopping that murder is something that he needs to stop at all costs, with anything he could, with all of his might. He believes that that's a justifiable act, that his act of violence is stopping thousands and millions of other acts of violence. He likely believed, and probably today still believes, that he was justified. I'm not saying it was right. I'm not saying it was justified. I'm just saying put yourself in his mindset. Put yourself in the mindset of the January 6th protesters. I know people who were out there on January 6th. There were thousands and thousands of people there. And whether you agree or disagree with their point, they believed that the election was stolen. They believed that their government, which is run by the will of the people, had subverted the will of the people. And so they went out to protest. Even those idiots who stormed the Capitol thought that they were doing the right thing. Many of them did, at least. They were wrong. We all know they were wrong. But in their minds, they were justified. You could say the same thing about those those who broke in and burned down small businesses in the city of Chicago or St. Louis or Minneapolis during the Black Lives Matter protests. People thought they were justified. This is the problem, is that oftentimes people can justify their violence. And it's hard to talk to them to tell them that this violence is not right. When we look at some surveys nowadays, anywhere between 10 and 25% of Americans think that violence actually is justified against the government at some point. It's a scary, scary statistic. We could get into a great philosophical debate about why violence is wrong. I'm just going to tell you, I'm not equipped for that debate. I could tell you that it's morally wrong. I could say the Bible says in Romans, be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. But then you'll come back at me and said, Jesus flipped over the tables of the tax collectors. I mean, wouldn't we all want to do that? And I'd reply, yeah, you're not Jesus. That was Jesus. You're not Jesus. I could say it's philosophically wrong. I could read you quotes from philosophers. Shakespeare, not necessarily a philosopher, but close to one in my mind. Violent ends or violent delights have violent ends. Your violence is simply going to lead to more violence. But I'm sure you'd find quotes from other philosophers that said, look, great good was done with violence. Look at some of the world wars where violent dictators were stopped by using violence. I'm just not equipped to have that kind of a philosophical debate. But here's where I am equipped. I'm equipped to talk about the politics. I'm a political expert, and I need you to know that when you perform these acts of violence, you are hurting our cause. My old pastor used to say, if you're wrong in the way you're right, you're wrong, even if you're right. Now, it's kind of ironic because that pastor was taken down by being wrong in the way that he was right. So he didn't even take his own advice. But it's a quote that has stuck with me for a very long time, and that even if you're right, the way you go about it is oftentimes what dictates whether you're right or not right. I can emphatically show you that when you use violence, you hurt our cause more than you help it, because we're in a representative democracy. We're in a system where power is held by the people. You hear this a lot from conservatives. We the people is the quote used very often. And that's a great thing. Power in America is derived by the will of the people. And so when you're trying to get anything done in this country, you have to have the will of the people behind you. And so it matters less that you're right. It matters more that people think that you're right, because you need them on your side if you're ever going to get anything done politically. We're in a battle for hearts and minds. And here's the thing. When you turn to violence, you lose those hearts and minds. Gandhi once said that victory attained by violence is tantamount to a defeat, for it is momentary. And it's absolutely true. Take the situation in Danville, for example. This man who did this, did he stop a single abortion? No. The property owner will rebuild. The abortion provider, the clinic, will find some other place, or they'll stay there and rebuild themselves that they hadn't moved in yet. People who are looking for abortions will find another provider. There are plenty for them to go to. Not a single abortion was stopped by this man's act. Think about January 6th. Did those who stormed the Capitol from the protests, did they stop Biden from getting elected? Did they stop Biden from taking office? Is Trump the president right now? No. These acts of violence led to none of the intended good consequences. On the main side, the fallout was tremendous. The negatives from these are huge. Think about the violence in Danville. The public now has more sympathy for abortions and abortion providers and less for the pro-life cause. They think we're violent. They think we're crazy. This man by himself has created a wave of public sentiment against his own cause by this act of violence. Because of January 6th, our research has shown, my political team can tell you, we've seen it on the ground, Republicans lost in 2022 in these elections. Elections we were supposed to win, and it all came back to January 6th, the threat to democracy. The violence on January 6th lost us the U.S. Senate. It lost us seats in the Illinois House. It lost us legislatures across the country. So not only did they not get Trump back in office and keep him in office, they lost Republicans and conservative seats across the country, which means to them, more of the policies that they oppose are being put into office because of their own actions. And by the way, Trump, running for re-election in 2024, many of us see that one of his biggest challenges is going to be January 6th. The average voter dislikes Trump more today than they did before because of January 6th. And so these actions that these protesters, these violent protesters took when they decided to storm the Capitol may even keep Trump from winning election again in 2024. When had they not done it, the odds of their guy making it back in the White House were a lot higher. Their actions actually hurt their cause more than it helped it. If you look at those studies I mentioned before, it was anywhere between 10 and 25% who said that violence sometimes is acceptable. That means anywhere between 75 and 90 don't think it's acceptable. That is heartening news. That means that the majority of the American public do not support this violence. But here's something that's even more interesting. If you dig into a lot of those studies, there's another study that was done by the National Academy of Sciences where they also did research and they dug into some of this. And what they found is that the reason so many people supposedly supported violence in political discourse was because that violence was never described. It was never determined or said what that violence would be. What they found is that once that violence was defined, support dropped like a rock. What do I mean by that? When I say, hey, would you support violence in some cases? You might say, okay, that kind of makes sense. But then when I say, okay, let's talk about what that violence could be. It could be something as simple as protesting without a permit or some simple vandalism. It could be even worse, like arson or assault. Or it could be awful, like murder or assault with a deadly weapon. Once you define what violence means, what they saw was that support dropped as low as 3%. It wasn't as high as 25%. It dropped all the way down to 3%. Americans do not support actual violence. As a matter of fact, when they gave those acts and said what should be done, for each one, a minimum of 89% and a maximum of 100 said that those people that committed those crimes, that committed that violence, they should be charged for a crime. People not only believe that violence shouldn't be done, they believe that violent doers should be charged with a crime and should be penalized for those crimes. Every conservative that I know who talks about January 6th says the idiots who stormed should be charged with their crimes. They should be punished for what they do. That is the sentiment of America. When we talk about the need for law and order, that's what you see in everyday Americans, is that they do not support this violence. And so when you turn to this violence, you're turning off the very people that you're trying to reach. Why? Because it makes you look radical. It makes you look extreme. It makes our side seem crazy. There's a thing in politics, because there's a thing in our minds, that when you say one side is extreme, the other side looks more normal. The more our side looks extreme, the more Democrats look mainstream. The more progressives and even socialists look mainstream, because we're the ones turning to violence and they're not the ones turning to violence. That's what happens when you turn to violence. It also shows that you're completely devoid of reason. Most people turn to violence once they've run out of reason, once they've run out of facts. You see, the facts are actually on our side. There is no reason for us to have to turn to violence. You can stick to facts and still actually win an argument, be persuasive. When we turn to violence, what we're saying basically is that we don't have any facts, so we have to force you to come to our position. That has never been persuasive in the history of mankind. In fact, what we see is that those who turn to violence, others are hardwired to want to stop that violence. I've seen it time and time again. I have progressive friends who, when the peaceful protesters for Black Lives Matter turned into riots, they were turned off completely from the cause itself because they did not agree with the violence. I know plenty of people who were out in D.C. on January 6th, who were there peacefully, who didn't go into the Capitol, and they were turned off the moment they heard what happened, that people had stormed into the Capitol. Even when you're on our side, we turn away from you when you go to violence. That is how our brains are hardwired. That's how we are set as humans. And so when you turn to violence, you're losing even your own support. You're losing your own base. Let me illustrate this point as I'm about to close the video. Let me give you two stories of the difference on this exact topic. We're talking about the pro-life cause. I'm going to give you two stories of people who really, really cared about the pro-life cause. On the one side, about a decade ago, because I'm way older than I like to say, but I like to admit, but I've been doing politics for a long time. And I remember vividly, about a decade ago, a woman who was very involved politically in our local Republican organization was driving down the street in Palatine when she passed a few dozen people who were protesting abortion, who were waving around, I'm sure some of you guys have seen this, graphic images of aborted babies, aborted fetuses, just gross, and it was intended to scare people, and, well, shocker, it worked. This woman had young children in the car. She had 3 kids, 2 of which were in the car, and both of them were young, and they were traumatized by this. She was incensed. Both kids, they stopped at the stoplight, both looked out, and there were people waving these aborted fetuses, 3-year-old and 6-year-old. How do you explain that to a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old? She couldn't. And it got so bad that she decided she was done. She quit politics entirely. She left the Republican organization. We lost one of our best volunteers. Fast forward to today, and I'm not going to give names because I don't want to out them, but her oldest is now a very active political person on the progressive side. We lost them entirely. Let me give you a different story. Somebody who took a different approach. A few years later from that, I was teaching a class, teaching a bunch of candidates in Indiana. There was a man there who was just the sweetest man. I got to know him. We became Facebook friends. And this is somebody whose major issue was the life issue. And he would frequently stand outside abortion clinics like some people tend to do. Of course, his goal was to try to minimize the number of abortions. But unlike others who would yell and scream and shame the women who were walking in to potentially get an abortion, he stood there with a smile on his face, loving, caring look, holding a sign that said, "We will help you." Powerful, powerful stuff. You see, not everyone going into that abortion clinic was doing it because they wanted to. As a matter of fact, many people, I hear stories of many women who have an abortion because they don't have any other options. They're put in a position in their lives where their lives, maybe their other children's lives, their families would be put in jeopardy, would put at risk, their livelihoods. They can't have another child. They do not have an option but to go in and potentially seek an abortion. This man understood that you're not going to shame a woman out of getting an abortion. You're not going to attack her and get her to change her mind, but offering assistance. Not every woman needs that. Not every woman is looking for that, but offering help. He could tell you stories about how sometimes women who needed that help would come, and maybe they wouldn't get an abortion. Maybe they still would, but they would accept that offer of help because he showed it in a loving way. If you're truly seeking to minimize the number of abortions, if you truly believe in life, which one was more effective? Which path was more effective? The one that turned people off from the pro-life cause? The one that caused a pro-life family to go the other way? Or the one that actually convinced some women to seek a different route? Which one was more effective? Was violence more effective, or was love and compassion, caring more effective? You see, you're hurting our cause when you turn to violence, but when you show that you care, when you show love and support, you might actually change some hearts and minds. And that's what we're in a fight for in politics. It's a fight for hearts and minds. This is a plea now to both sides to please stop the violence, cut it out. I want to end with a quote from someone much smarter than me, Martin Luther King Jr., who said, "The ultimate weakness of violence is that it is a descending spiral, begetting the very thing it seeks to destroy. Instead of diminishing evil, it multiplies it." He goes on to say a little later, "Returning violence for violence multiplies violence, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars." When we engage in violence, we're turning off the other side, but even worse, we're begetting more violence. This is beginning a downward spiral for our country. And as Abe Lincoln said, from the quote at the very beginning of this, the man who sat at this desk, that's what could destroy America. Not outside forces, not Russia or China or anyone else. It's us. We're the ones who could destroy this country that has been passed down to us by generation after generation. We hold the future of this great country in our hands. Do not end it. Do not destroy it, because you can't find a way to use reason in your political discourse and instead had to turn to violence. We're better than that. You're better than that. I hope you enjoyed this video. We're going to do more of these live from the Lincoln Desk segments. Please add your comments in. We'll engage. We've got a lot more topics to talk about in the future. Thanks so much for watching. I look forward to having more conversations with you in the very near future.